August 7th, 1918. Trotsky's train pulls into Svietsk. Kazan has just fallen to the White forces the day before. The situation is absolute chaos. Fresh detachments arriving from Moscow are swallowed by the inertia of retreat. The peasantry believe Soviet power is doomed, and local priests and merchants are lifting their heads in anticipation. Trotsky writes, "Everything was crumbling. There wasn't anything to hold to. The situation seemed hopeless." But then he adds a sentence that anchors this entire deep dive. The fate of the revolution was being decided here at Svietsk, and here at the most critical moment it rested on a single battalion, on one company, on the courage of one commissary. In short, it really was hanging by a thread. So this is In Defense of October, Episode 3, Civil War, the Red Army, and the Defense of the Revolution. Part 2, The Critical Campaigns.
The question this part takes up is, how did the Red Army transform from a panicked, crumbling mass into a disciplined fighting force during the critical campaigns of the Civil War? And what did the sharp strategic debates inside the Bolshevik leadership reveal about their political and military methods? We are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of any political faction. We are examining the historical events and ideas as they are presented in the source material.
Right. So previously, in the summer of 1918, a military noose was tightening around Moscow.
Yeah, they were completely surrounded.
Literally surrounded, and they had absolutely no regular army. Trotsky was appointed Commissar of War, building the Red Army from nothing, using Tsarist military specialists under the strict dual control of Bolshevik political commissars. He imposes iron discipline. He constructs an armored train as the flying mobile nerve center. The apparatus is built. Now it faces the fire.
The structural foundation is there, but the actual survival of the state has to be won in the field.
Exactly. I want to place you directly into the physical crisis on the Volga. Red units had abandoned Kazan without a fight on August 6, 1918.
Without a single shot.
Right. The staff was completely caught off guard. Some members turned out to be active traitors. The road to Moscow was wide open. Trotsky arrives on August 7 for a one-month stay that basically becomes a great training school.
Yeah, and to really understand the stakes, you have to look at how Trotsky himself framed this specific moment in time. He wrote, "In my life," verbatim, "here, before Kazan, one could see on a small stretch of land the multiple diversity of the factors in human history, and could draw up arguments against that cowardly historical fatalism which, on all concrete questions, hides behind the passive working of the law of cause and effect, ignoring the while that most important factor, the living and active man. Human decisions determine historical outcomes."
So you hear that, and a natural question comes up, how can the arrival of a single train and a few commanders possibly reverse the inertia of an entire collapsing army?
It's a huge task.
It's massive. And it requires an immediate, shocking assertion of authority. Right away, the 4th Latvian Regiment threatens mutiny. They want immediate relief. Trotsky summons the commanders to his train carriage, arrests them, and the arrest holds.
He doesn't even have a massive security apparatus with him. He's just operating on sheer political will.
Right, but the danger is everywhere. Another fresh regiment actually deserts entirely. They seize a Volga steamer to flee to Nizhny Novgorod.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't just panicked foot soldiers. The commander and the commissar led the desertion. They literally hijacked a boat and ran.
And this is where we get to Markin. Trotsky's account of Sailor Commissar Markin's intervention reads, "I had a talk with the indispensable Markin. Boarding an improvised gunboat with a score of tested men, he sailed up to the steamer held by the deserters and at the point of a gun demanded their surrender. Everything depended on that one moment. A single rifle shot would have been enough to bring on a catastrophe, but the deserters surrendered without resisting. Authority was restored through direct confrontation."
I mean, put yourself on that river. Markin pulls up in this tiny gunboat alongside a massive steamer. If one person panics, it's a bloodbath.
Yeah, the tension is just unreal.
But they surrender, so they hold a court-martial. The commander and commissar are executed. Then they insert dedicated communists directly into the ranks to reform the unit from the inside. But the danger wasn't just fleeing troops. You also had treason inside the command post.
Right, the internal threat.
Yeah. There is this chilling story of an experienced artillery officer. He's standing there pale, using a field telephone, and he is actively directing enemy shells onto Trotsky's exact position.
He's literally calling in strikes on his own headquarters.
Exactly. Then the physical attacks start. Night falls. White Colonel Kappel launches a surprise raid. He penetrates the rear. It's total chaos. The train crew mobilizes. The cooks take up rifles. They fight a brutal, close-quarters battle for 8 continuous hours.
The cooks are fighting.
Literally everyone. But they hold the line. And then comes the naval raid on Kazan under Raskolnikov.
This is a crazy moment. Trotsky writes about the raid. The flotilla set out in battle formation with lights out like a thief in the night. Two old Volga pilots, both with thin little beards, stood next to the captain. Having been forced to come aboard, they were in mortal fear every minute and were hating us and cursing their fate, trembling the while like aspens. The environment itself was incredibly hostile.
They creep down the dark river. A flare shoots up. The steering gear in the lead boat breaks.
So they're trapped in the light.
Trapped in the glaring light, totally exposed. But they manage to throttle the left and right engines alternately to escape. And that sheer audacity cracks the white resistance. They capture Kazan on September 10th and Simbirsk on September 12th.
Gusev's 1924 testimony really captures this shift. He says, the arrival of Comrade Trotsky worked a decisive change in this situation. In Comrade Trotsky's train to the obscure station of Sviazhsk, there came a firm will to victory, a new sense of initiative and resolute pressure in all phases of the army work. From the very first days, everyone began to feel that some abrupt change had taken place, with the result that the disorganized and demoralized units of the Fifth Army were changed into the fighting units that later recaptured Kazan. The psychological transformation enabled the military victory.
And this Fifth Army develops a totally unique character. You have Ivan Nikitich Smirnov acting as the conscience of Sviazhsk.
Yeah.
You have the brilliant writer Larissa Reisner serving in the ranks. It's a crucible. But then the strategic debates begin. In 1919, on the Eastern Front against Kolchak, Vazedis wants to halt at the Urals. Sergei Kamenev wants to pursue.
Two totally different strategies.
Right. Trotsky backs Vazedis, but the Central Committee backs Kamenev. And Trotsky just accepts the decision. It completely demonstrates the living reality of collective Bolshevik discipline.
He gets overruled, but he stays and does the work.
Exactly. Then the crisis shifts south. Denikin's volunteer army threatens Tula. The High Command drafts a plan to strike Denikin's Cossack base in the Kuban. Now, from a conventional military standpoint, striking an enemy's home base makes perfect sense. Why did Trotsky vehemently oppose it?
It comes down to class analysis. Trotsky writes, had this not been a civil war, the plan would have been correct. But in its application to the real Southern Front, the plan proved to be merely a theoretical one, and greatly helped the enemy. Whereas Denikin had failed to persuade the Cossacks to a long marching campaign against the north, he now was helped by our striking at the Cossack nests from the south. After this, the Cossacks could no longer defend themselves on their own land. We had ourselves bound up their fate with that of the volunteer army. Military strategy cannot ignore class dynamics.
So they essentially forced the Cossacks to fight.
Right, because they attacked their homes. Trotsky also issued this warning about being misunderstood. He wrote, I built my plan on the relations of the peasants and workers on the one side and the Cossacks on the other, and on this line of argument I opposed my own plan to the academic scheme of the High Command, which met with support from the majority of the Central Committee. If I had spent 1,000th part of the effort used to prove my underappreciation of the peasantry, I could have built up just as absurd an accusation, not only against Zinoviev, Stalin, and the rest, but against Lenin as well. Strategy requires precise social analysis.
And the Central Committee initially rejects Trotsky's plan. They launch the Kuban offensive, and it is a total military disaster.
Total mess.
Complete disaster. So
Yeah.
the Central Committee has to reverse course. They adopt Trotsky's original plan, and ultimately, Denikin's army is destroyed.
Which proves the point about class dynamics.
Completely. Then, in October 1919, Yudenich attacks Petrograd. Trotsky rushes there and rallies the defense, but we have to move to the Polish War of April 1920. The Red Army advances rapidly to the gates of Warsaw.
They moved incredibly fast. And Trotsky gave this sober assessment of that overextension, he wrote. The question was simply one of the correlation of forces. The unknown quantity was the attitude of the Polish workers and peasants. Some of our Polish comrades, such as the late J. Markolewski, a co-worker of Rosa Luxemburg's, weighed the situation very soberly. The former's estimation was an important factor in my desire to get out of the war as quickly as possible. Military success outpaced political reality.
Yeah, Lenin pushed the offensive forward, dreaming of helping the Polish workers overthrow Pilsudski.
Even though the lines were stretched.
Exactly. There was no uprising, and it ended in a catastrophe for the Red Army.
Trotsky drew a profound dialectical lesson from this. He stated, the Polish War confirmed from the opposite side what was demonstrated by the Brest-Litovsk War, that the events of war and those of the revolutionary mass movement are measured by different yardsticks. Where the action of armies is measured by days and weeks, the movement of the masses of people is usually reckoned in months and years. If this difference in tempo is not taken fully into account, the gears of war will only break the teeth of the revolutionary gears instead of setting them in motion. Political revolutions operate on a slower timeline than military campaigns.
You just can't force a society to revolt at the speed of an army.
Look,
But it wasn't just a miscalculation. There was internal rot at Warsaw.
oh, this is a crucial detail.
Stalin was on the southwestern front. He deliberately delayed sending his armies to support Tukhachevsky's exposed flank because he wanted to enter Lvov as a conqueror himself.
He literally put his vanity above the war effort.
Thousands died because of it. And this insubordination connects to a broader issue. The military opposition. They advocated for decentralized partisan guerrilla warfare.
Which sounds good on paper.
Right. Shouldn't a revolutionary force naturally rely on decentralized guerrilla tactics rather than a traditional state army?
You would think so. But Trotsky rejected that abstract partisan framework. He wrote, "The opposition tried to find some general theoretical formula for their stand. They insisted that a centralized army was characteristic of a capital state. Revolution had to blot out not only positional war, but a centralized army as well. The very essence of revolution was its ability to move about, to deliver swift attacks, and to carry out maneuvers. Its fighting force was embodied in a small, independent detachment made up of various arms. In short, the tactics of a small war were proclaimed the tactics of revolution." Abstract theories ignored the need for centralized power.
You need a state apparatus to fight an industrial war. But this opposition centralized its resistance at Tsaritsyn, which is the future Stalingrad. Voroshilov and Stalin cultivated this cliquish, undisciplined warlordism.
Total defiance of central orders.
Yeah, they just ignored Moscow. So Trotsky goes to Tsaritsyn to confront Voroshilov.
And it was a direct confrontation. Trotsky recalled, "A few hours later, I met Voroshilov. The staff was in a state of alarm. I put the question to Voroshilov. How did he regard the orders from the front and the high command? He opened his heart to me. Tsaritsyn thought it necessary to execute only such orders as it considered right. Open defiance threatened the entire command structure."
It's unbelievable. Trotsky sends urgent telegrams to Lenin, calling the Tsaritsyn policy, quote, "a most dangerous ulcer, worse than any treason."
The long-term damage of that ulcer is staggering. Trotsky later provided this retrospective analysis of the Tsaritsyn clique. Quote, "In all this affair, I had no feeling of personal prejudice or ill will. I think I can rightfully say that in all my political activity, personal considerations have never played a part. But in the great struggle that we were carrying on, the stakes were too big to permit me to consider side issues. As a result, I frequently trod on the toes of personal prejudice, friendly favoritism, or vanity. Stalin carefully picked up the men whose toes had been trodden on. He had the time and the personal interest to do it. From that time on, the Tsaritsyn ruling circle became one of his chief weapons. Personal grievances built the future bureaucracy."
So it all comes down to the aftermath.
The Red Army won the Civil War, but the victory carried a devastating social cost. The working class that made the revolution was decimated at the front, and its survivors were absorbed into the state apparatus. The factories emptied, and the proletariat was atomized. The bureaucracy did not arise from Bolshevik theory, but from the material exhaustion and isolation of a declassed worker state. Sviazk saved the revolution, but Tsaritsyn prepared its bureaucratic degeneration.
And so, we close on the precipice of the post-war crisis. The White Guards are defeated, but Soviet Russia is a physical and economic wasteland. The Civil War is won, the interventionists are gone. But the country is in ruins, and the peasantry is in open revolt against the emergency system of war communism. Next time on In Defense of October. Episode 3, Civil War. Part 3, Victory and its Shadow. The deepest crisis of the Soviet state's early existence, the peasant uprisings, the 10th Party Congress, and the dramatic revolt of the Kronstadt sailors against the workers' government.